This is Inside the Right. So, Tim, Donald Trump's Time interview came out. The guy came out and suggested that he is fine with states monitoring women who seek abortions. This is the newest revelation here. This continues to plague him. It continues to plague the Republican Party. And by now, it's hard to imagine that it's anything else other than by design. Was this a gaffe by Trump, or is this somehow a deliberate strategy?
A little bit of both. I mean, this is not a smart man, and this is not a man that's thought a lot about the issue of abortion.
Yeah.
I mean, this has plagued him not just recently, all the way back to Chris Matthews' interview 10 years ago. When he talked about criminalizing abortion for women,
Yeah.
he doesn't know how to talk about this issue because it doesn't come from a genuine place. He has made a deal with the evangelical base in order to retain political power, and so he gets lost. And so his strategy, to the extent that it's a strategy, is he thinks that if he just says states' rights, that's like a get out of jail free card. And he can just say states' rights on everything. But he hasn't thought about this deeply enough to when certain topics come up, like when a reporter says, hey, well, then in that case, do you think a state should be able to monitor a woman's abortions a woman's pregnancy to know how long she is in her gestational period before determining whether or not she has access to care? Rather than just being like, no, that is insane. I'm not comfortable with that. The state should not be monitoring women's, gestational status. He's like, whatever. If Alabama wants to do that, Alabama wants to do that. He has not thought about this stuff deeply. And so in some ways, I think for some people, they might think, well, okay, that since he's not that serious about it, it isn't a real threat. But that's where I think the Time interview is the most alarming, because combined with these extreme abortion views, he talks about his hiring process and how he's only going to hire people that agree that the 2020 election was stolen, and that, he wants to hire these true believers. So he's going to put in place some of the most extreme, far right, sociopathic people in all of politics throughout the government, and many of them will implement some of these horrible policies that he's just whatever not versed enough in to care about. And so I think that is the alarming thing for me, just like this willingness to go along with these extreme policies, plus a commitment to appoint and to hire folks that are totally in line with the far right MAGA agenda. To me, that revelation in the Time interview is what was the most alarming.
And so, what do you say to people who kind of have their heels dug in on this idea that, okay, Trump doesn't really believe in this stuff. He's a moderate. He probably paid for abortions himself. And so it's not really a threat to me.
Well, for starters, he's appointing the judges that are making a lot of these rulings. Like
Right.
so again, Trump could do his best to try to take the moderate view on IVF, which is like just the normal humane view that people should have access to IVF. But it was his judge, that was the one in Alabama that said that whatever, the fertilized egg is a human, and so that made IVF in threat in Alabama, and made doctors at certain hospitals feel like they couldn't do it, and so that you just kind of expand that out to an entire government apparatus. Who's going to be in at HHS? Who's going to be in at DOJ? Who's going to regulate, the mail, the post office, right? That's like a big question
Yeah.
that also he gets into in this interview, right? Can the morning after pill or whatever be mailed from one state to another state if there are different abortion regimes in each state? Who's going to enforce that? Well, people that are going to enforce that are anti-abortion zealots, MAGA zealots, that have been approved by the Project 2025 and the other people in Trump's orbit.
Right.
He
And these
wasn't
guys
that
aren't
good.
New York City playboys who've paid for
No.
abortions. These are true believers.
Yeah, exactly. And he wasn't that good at that first time around. He had some crazies in his administration. Stephen Miller, we could go down the list. But there were a lot of kind of normal bureaucrats,
Right.
establishment
The Rex
Republicans.
Tillersons, the H.R. McMasters,
Yeah.
and those guys.
And there were a lot of that down the chain too, right? Like people that would have been in any moderate Republicans administration that
Right.
you might disagree with on certain issues, but are not radicals. That is different. That is going to be different soup to nuts this time. They are prepared and they talked about this. They're going to fire bureaucrats using Schedule F that don't go along with the extreme agenda. I'm sure we can get into the immigration side of this, which is maybe even scarier than the abortion side, if that's imaginable. And then there is just the proactive hiring vetting process where they've said it's a litmus test that you basically have to believe in the big lie and be a MAGA true believer to get a job.
And just a quick note for folks watching right now, if you want to hear more from Tim, support the work that he and his team at the Bulwark do, please subscribe to the Bulwark's YouTube channel. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. This way we can build up this pro-democracy ecosystem that stretches all the way from right to left. Tim, do you think that Donald Trump is banking on this issue, the issue of abortion, somehow getting lost amid what he will probably view as like this extreme polarization, that Republicans are just going to vote Republican, Democrats are just going to vote Democrat, and so the issues don't really matter. He can get away with saying crazy stuff because he's kind of just banking on the fact that everybody's going to come home to their respective parties.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think he might be lost on this issue, honestly. I think he's worried about it. That, again, I'm not.
Right,
It's not
I'm
like
like
I'm in the inner
conferring.
circle.
I'm conferring like too much strategy to what may just be like a really dumb political strategy.
Yeah, I think it's maybe that this guy knows it might be a problem, but he knows that he's stuck with the anti-abortion crowd, right? Like he can't, he can only move away so far. He can't have a backlash to his own base. Maybe he's not. I don't know. Maybe he tries to wiggle out of it later this year. I think that he's flailing on the abortion thing, to be honest. And so I think that's why if you read the transcript of the Time interview, it's one of those things where like the headline is scary. The whole thing's scary. But
Yeah.
if you actually read the full transcript, he's like lashing about, grasping about for answers, and there's a lot of weird non sequiturs and a lot of ducking the answer of abortion. And he is trying to wiggle out of this. To me, it read like somebody that doesn't really have the vocabulary to talk about this, does not actually care about women's rights, and so hasn't actually talked to any women who might tell him like, hey, here's some here's some red flags you should avoid. And so he thinks that maybe that he thought that the states' rights thing was going to be his out, and it seems to me like this is the guy that's maybe coming to terms with the fact that it's not going to be his out.
You don't think he's getting that feminine touch surrounding himself with Rudy Giuliani, Stephen Miller, and Steve Bannon?
No, there was a graphic. Was it in the Time article? No, it was in Axios. There was a graphic of his inner circle, and it's like literally 100 dudes, and then Susie Wiles, who's his campaign manager, who's not a policy person, and then Kellyanne is like on the outside circle as a former advisor. It's like that's it. You have Kellyanne and a bunch of dudes.
Yeah, well, that's he's moving forward in his campaign exactly that way. Like
Yeah,
it reads, it tracks.
yeah, it tracks.
Tim, you occupy an interesting space of very gettable Republicans and former Republicans. What issues have you found are the most salient at moving these people? Do you think it's the issue of abortion? I mean, you wouldn't think, like on its face, that the issue of abortion, of being pro-choice, is necessarily an issue that's going to be especially salient among Republicans. But have you found that, or if not, what issue?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that there are a couple. You have to kind of separate them into different groups, right? You can't like kind of lump, people like the cliches like Hispanics are not a monolith, like
Right.
Latinos are not gettable Republicans are not a monolith, right?
Yeah.
Because you have the moderate suburban kind of mom types. Most of them have kind of come around already, but abortion matters to them, right? You have another group. I think the key group that I always talk about on this show is like these Wall Street Journal dads, college educated Republican dads, like think Trump's kind of crazy. For them, it's more like democracy, Trump being crazy, risks. Abortion is
Right.
maybe part of it because they like, not that abortion is a fundamental issue that they care about, but like the women in their life care about abortion. Like they're not religious outright, wingers
Right.
types. Like they might go to church, they might not, but they're not like hard right religious folks. So for them, maybe. But to me, the democracy thing, Trump talks about tariffs in this thing. I think tariffs and NATO, foreign policy, sucking up to Putin, that
Which
stuff.
is so great that just a quick aside on the tariffs thing, like imposing a tariff on other countries is only going to is only going to have the effect of raising prices for Americans. How is nobody connecting that on the Republican side, that if you impose tariffs, it just makes prices more expensive for the products that are getting sent here?
Yeah, it's insane. I do think that is, I think, a useful issue for that group of the Wall Street Journal dads, right? Because they get that. It's on the Wall Street Journal editorial page every day. So I think they would get that. A lot of working class people, though, see the other side of it, which is, okay, maybe it means more jobs, more manufacturing here. So I think it cuts a little bit both ways. The group, though, that I was trying to get to, that I think abortion is the most helpful with, that I think gets ignored a lot, is kind of soft MAGA women. And let me explain. I'm here in Pennsylvania right now. That's why I have this weird background. And Trump flipped Pennsylvania a lot based on kind of the rural part of the state, right? Where in the smaller towns, the smaller cities. And a lot of those people had been union households, they'd been Democrats, they were secular. You always think about the union men, but their wives, they had always been Democrats, and some of them had Trump appealed to them because they felt like he was speaking more to their concerns.
Yeah.
Now, the guys are pretty much still with Trump, but the women that used to be Democrats, they voted for Obama, then they flipped for Trump. They're in rural America. That's not the typical never Trumper you think of, but that could be, I think, a gettable person on the abortion issue, where like they were for Trump, but they're not putting on the red hat. Like their friends are for Trump, but maybe in the privacy of the voting booth, they're like, I'm a little bit freaked out about the 6-week abortion ban stuff. I'm freaked out about my daughter. A lot of them are working class. Maybe they might not have access to care. And Carrie Lake's like, go to another state. Like they're the types of people that might not have the resources to like do that if there is a strict abortion law. So I think that is a group that Democrats could really focus on trying to reach. Kind of rural, non-college women, and maybe you're not going to win that group, but if you could improve on the margins, I think that could really help here in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin in particular.
Well, kind of building off that too, there is the other another faction of people that you wouldn't think would be gettable, but based on the issue of abortion, is like young men, like young college-age men, like who I can't think of a group that would be more afraid of all of a sudden criminalizing the issue of abortion than like. I mean, literally, that's what it was just like when I was in college and I was living in my fraternity house, and like if the issue of abortion was like criminalized, and all of a sudden everybody. I mean, it goes without saying, right? Like, I don't have to explain why
Everybody
like young
had a big night out, maybe
like,
had an accident.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, it's just it's crazy that for that cohort of people that you wouldn't think that this is a crazy effective issue. Like those kids are not thinking about Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. They're not thinking about tariffs and tax structure or any of it, or healthcare. They're just thinking about what's going to happen in their lives between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. And like this might have a really big impact.
Yeah, I do. I think the abortion issue brings some new groups into the table. And so I do think when we're talking about this, like a lot of times on this show, when I'm talking about the gettable Republicans, that might not be the top issue for that like suburban college educated older 50-60 demo, but I think that there's some of these other demos. I'm with you. I think it brings some people into the game for Democrats.
We'll continue to cover this as it continues to progress and as Donald Trump continues to make these unforced errors. With that said, again, for those watching right now, if you want to see and hear more from Tim, which is especially important right now as we're building up this ecosystem, please make sure to subscribe to The Bulwark. Again, I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Tim Miller.
This is Inside the Right.